Hey everyone, welcome to episode 80 of the Ceres podcast. I'm your host Stelios, and today we talk to Kate Nicholls from UK Hospitality. It was really good to catch up with Kate. The team at UK Hospitality have been working tirelessly to protect the hospitality industry through COVID, as always. As you will hear in this conversation, they've been talking directly with government to make sure that hospitality hasn't been left out the loop. I want to take this moment and this opportunity to show gratitude to Kate and the team at UK Hospitality. Everyone that I've spoken to this morning doing preparation and research all wanted to extend that gratitude to UK Hospitality. Me and Kate touch on it in this podcast, and we both agreed that in order to tackle the government on reforming VAT, we all need to start by talking and informing our local MPs. It all starts at the bottom. We have put together on our Ceres website a template and a guide to write to your local MP. Invite them round, start talking to them, set up with a group of restaurant owners, chip shop owners, pizza owners, hotel owners, whatever it is, anyone in hospitality, and start talking to government. Especially at that local level, explain to them how the 20% just doesn't work. And, when you start talking in numbers at that local level, the local MP is going to start really listening, and he's going to start kicking it up the chain. And then at the same time, if UK Hospitality and so on start squeezing it from the top, there might be a result. You never know. It helps them do their job. We've always known that 20% is incredibly high, and although it is a consumer tax, it's really hard to justify it to customers who have no idea what it is. So now's the time. You can find the letter template in our shop. It's free, of course, so don't worry, and it will download automatically once you go through the order process. Then you can either download it automatically, as we just said, or it sits in your account area. Onto the online shop. If you place an order from now till the 17th of December, we will choose 3 customers who have made a purchase or a donation to HeartLink charity. It's really easy, there's nothing to do, and 3 people will win a lovely M&S hamper. So there's a few more days for that because we want to send it out before Christmas ideally. Now, for our deliveries, our small deliveries, you order 1 of this or 2 of that, we use UPS. They're really great, but at the moment they're really busy because of COVID and Christmas. So if you do need stock, or your wholesalers ran out, or whatever it is that you need, don't leave it to the last minute before you order. We understand that sometimes you do run out, but just understand that with how busy they are at the moment, we've just got to be careful that you're not sitting there waiting for it. So, as always, if you have any feedback, send it our way. We love to hear it. So, on to the episode with Kate. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Kate. Welcome to episode 80 of the Ceres podcast.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be able to come back and have a chat and catch up.
It was this time last year, I think, that we spoke. It was about a week apart, give or take. And I don't know if you remember even, but we were all more worried and anxious about Brexit at the time. And
yes, I don't think we'd come across the word coronavirus. We weren't talking about COVID. The biggest anxiety was around how did we manage to get enough people to fill the labour shortages we had, the vacancies we had. And now a year on, and we're just before Brexit, and it's the last thing anybody asks me about.
It's true. And I guess sort of labour shortages, stuff like that, it's probably going to pop up again at some point, in the next couple of years. And but in the meantime, I think it's going to be COVID/Brexit, isn't it, again?
It is. I mean, that labour point will come back undoubtedly to bite us. We do know that once you lift the restrictions, there will be pent-up demand, both at high street hospitality levels, but also that longer-term demand for hotels, for international travel, for business events. it will come back. And those are the parts of the sector that have the highest proportion of seasonal workers, casual workers, the biggest labour demands. But it is looking as though it's going to take until 2023 before you get revenues recovering to the same levels, pre-COVID levels. So it's possible that we won't be in that situation of acute labour shortage as we were in last time we spoke this time last year for, potentially 1 to 2 years.
Yeah. And like I say, there's going to be, it's not like you're going to be sitting there waiting for that. You've got a lot to do from now till then, haven't you?
Well, quite. I think, many people in the industry would feel that that's going to be a sign of success, that we are back into a situation where we're reopening at the same level of and scale and pace that we were doing in the last 2-3 years. That means we've got a labour shortage and means that we are crying out for good quality people. I think, that to me would be a sign that the industry has reached recovery and we're back to full strength. It would be a nice problem to have. And at the moment, I think there's too many people who are really more concerned about survival. But then also, how do they keep the good people that they've got retained through what will be a very tricky period? And then the battle will be on. There's going to be some fantastic people who are on the labour market who sadly lost their jobs throughout this crisis. And it'll be who can snap up the brightest and the best as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And, I've been doing a bit of research and I reached out to quite a few people in the hospitality industry today. And I said that you were coming on and I said, like, what would you like to ask or what would you like to sort of put across? And overwhelmingly, everyone wanted to thank you for your support. Honestly, and it was like that was the first thing. It was like, well, before you ask this, just say this. And it was like, thank her for a stellar support because without her, we couldn't have done it. And I think there was about 6 people just this morning alone. And one person rang me enthusiastically and said, "Please say thank you."
Well, that's really kind of all your listeners. I always feel inspired. It's their hard work, it's their challenges, it's their humility in the face of what they've had to deal with, and the outreach that people have made to their local communities. That's what inspires me and keeps me going, and just trying to do my best to be able to get the best outcome for the industry and the people who are working in it.
Yeah, and obviously, you've been sort of recognised by the Katies and the AA, and that must feel quite good as well. I don't mean to make you blush here.
No, it is really nice. I'm doing my job. My job is to be there as the champion of the industry, to be the representative voice, to be the figurehead and the face, and to get the best possible outcome. I never thought I'd have to be working in the kind of conditions that we've been working through and to be dealing with COVID and the fallout of COVID for as long. It is really nice. What I feel that is particularly helpful and valuable is that it's a recognition of the work of the whole team. Because it is more than just me at UK Hospitality, and people have been working flat out 24/7 since February on trying to get through the coronavirus crisis, help our members get through it. And so I always see those awards not being as for me, but for being for the whole team who were working so hard. And they're the ones that seldom get to come and be on these podcasts to go to the awards ceremonies and hear all the nice things, and they don't often get the thanks. So it's quite a good opportunity for me to be able to thank them when they go up and when I get an award, to be able to say how much it means to me to have their support behind me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, if Tony's ever bored, he's more than welcome to come on the podcast sometime.
I'll tell him.
I'm sure we could talk hospitality and Cypriot politics.
Yeah, probably the other way around. Cypriot politics, Cypriot food, and then get on to hospitality.
Of course, it's somewhere there after Cypriot food, isn't it? So when the initial lockdown sort of came down, did you envisage this? Like this sort of, we're 9 months in now? Like, did you envisage this sort of long process? Or was there looking back, did you think, oh, this is going to be a few months, we'll be out of the woods?
I thought it would be a few months. I didn't think it would be as long as this, and I really didn't think we would go into full lockdown. So we started working on this January last year when it was first announced that the virus had escaped Wuhan and it was in Beijing. And as soon as you know that it's going to be a matter of when it reaches our shores, not if. And so there was the level of planning that went in was from January. But when we were all looking at it and seeing, economies, seeing countries overwhelmed by the virus, I don't think any of us thought that we would fully lock down. I remember having conversations with politicians and with health officials where they were saying, we just don't think we can do to our population what they've done in China. So we'll have to look at different ways of managing this virus. We'll have to look at containment. And I remember counting the cases each day as trying to sit and work through. I think it really hit home that we were going to be doing something more dramatic from sort of mid-February. And that's when we started working with the government on what rescue package, what support packages we would need, because it was quite clear hospitality was going to be really hard hit, and tourism. But even when we had the announcement from the Prime Minister of don't go to pubs and restaurants on the 16th of March, I still think that we thought that this was going to be, I didn't believe the 3 weeks, but I didn't think it would be more than a couple of months. I certainly didn't think we were going to be in this yo-yo. And I also think I naively hoped and believed what they were saying, that we wouldn't have a second lockdown. So I think it was the second one that came as more of a shock to me and the team than the first one did.
I think one of the, you mentioned China, and I think everyone says, they managed to do all right. They managed to do all right. And then I was chatting to someone that was over there, and they literally said, you've got a few days to go get what you need. And then they put like emergency tape over your front door. And if that tape's broken, you get a fine, and in Korea, if you're South Korea, if your phone registers like a GPS signal outside of your home, you get a fine. And you think, we couldn't do a quarter of that in the UK. Like, look at what we did do, and people were moaning. And I just feel that, I've not got any. I always say to people, I don't have an issue with the way the government sort of dealt with certain things. Yeah, but if it happens again in 5 years, then I probably will do, because I think by that point we should be a bit more on top of it and ready for it. And, they should look back at this and say, okay, well, this didn't work. The 10 p.m. curfew didn't work, and this didn't work. So this is what we're doing, and have a proper plan for it. But yeah,
I mean, I think that's key. And I think that's why people have felt so frustrated by the second lockdown, that, we had we didn't know what we were dealing with in the first lockdown. You can make a lot of excuses, give the government, as you say, a lot of leeway for decisions that they made, because we didn't know what we were dealing with. Our pandemic plans were set up for a flu type epidemic, not this kind of epidemic. And so we did the best we could to be able to get through it. It does seem very frustrating that there wasn't the plan then put in place for what happens with the second wave. And I think you're right. One of the things we do need to learn from this is that we're going to have to live with this type of episode for longer. And it's going to become a regular feature. And in just the same way as we manage the flu season each year, I suspect we're going to have to manage a coronavirus situation each year, where you're going to get more cases now that it's in the population, it's in the system. And also we need to make sure we've got proper pandemic planning for this type of pandemic. The reason China, Southeast Asia, Korea, they managed it better was they had really bad SARS outbreaks and swine flu and MERS, and we didn't have that. And so I think, it's the danger of the boy who cried wolf, because it was about 15 years ago that we were supposed to have swine flu, and there was a huge pandemic plan that was put in place, and then it didn't turn out to be as infectious, didn't turn out to hit as many of the population. And so I think we rested on our laurels, and I do think you're right that we're going to need to learn those lessons pretty quickly. And equally, in the here and now, we need government to be able to start planning and looking at what is working. At the moment, it's still too much of a scattergun approach of, we don't really know what we need to do to stop transmission. So we'll do a curfew, and we'll do food, and we'll do rule of six, and we'll do X, Y, and Z. And there's no scientific method of saying what health intervention has the greatest impact, and how can we do it in the way that imposes the least economic harm. So at the moment, nobody can tell you accurately what it was that reduced cases in Bolton or Greater Manchester. Was it the curfew? Was it mixed households? Was it rule of six? We just don't know. And I think that's why people in hospitality are starting to get more and more frustrated when they're being asked to bear these disproportionate burdens, but we just don't know whether it's going to have an effect. And that comes down to, today's news story about London. London hospitality potentially going into tier 3. and the scientists are all saying it's not happening in hospitality. So how could closing hospitality solve the problems that you've got with high rates of transmission, predominantly, as I understand it, in secondary schools? So we need to get better at working out what works, what's needed. And I think if the general population know that the measures they're being asked to take will have a direct impact on the virus and cases of transmission, they are willing to go along with it and they will do it. But where you've got sort of no clear certainty that a particular action will have the net result, you just get businesses and communities left in limbo.
Yeah. And I think, I saw photos the other day in London, and it was almost outside Harrods. There was crowds of people all outside. And I know they say that transmission rates are low outside, but when there was that many people, it looked like there was a march. Maybe there was, but and they were so close to each other. I don't know. Like, you just think that it just, I think there is a thing that those people, like, there was no, I don't know, like, was there no sense of personal responsibility that they're out there in numbers, and the blame is going to be appropriated elsewhere as well, because it is always going to go towards hospitality. No matter what. 4 people can't have a meal in a restaurant because they might get too close to each other, but 4,000 people can stand next to each other in a road, and that's okay.
I think that's where you get those sort of arbitrary decisions, and that's where I think you lose public confidence in the strategy for tackling the disease. If you've not got very clear ideas about what is causing transmission and what interventions in their personal freedoms will have the most effect, people look at it, and when you see that the government is telling you it's okay to go out in that numbers, it's okay to go to shops, it's okay to go to sports grounds, theatres, live music, entertainment venues, I think it then becomes very difficult for people to understand why they can't see their family in their house. And then you just get widespread non-compliance. And I think that's why we're seeing spikes in transmission levels, even though we've been into our second lockdown. As people are, losing faith in the restrictions to deliver the end result, and therefore are making up their own interpretations of the rules. And meanwhile, you've got hospitality that's bearing the burden of those restrictions, having to abide by the rules because there's very heavy penalties, and not being able to see a way out of it. So it's imperative that we do get support to those businesses. If the Prime Minister's asking them to bear the burden of opening the rest of the economy and allowing people to have a normal Christmas, we need to give those businesses and the people they employ the support to get through this.
I'll tell you one thing that struck me, and I'm in the food industry, it probably didn't strike you as odd, the reliance on hospitality in the first lockdown. Like, so you don't realise how much people eat out until the supermarket shelves are empty, and, people that I'm talking to in the flour business are massively behind on trying to move from 20 kilos and 6 kilos to 1.5s. It just sort of shows that we don't realise that people probably eat out 2-3 times a week. And then all of a sudden you try to move all of that food into the sort of retail chain as opposed to the wholesale chain. And I think that really struck me as, wow, like that just, it was a big thing. Like, and I'm in the business, and I wonder if people even understand how reliant we are on hospitality as well.
No, I don't think they do. And it is a really important point, because if you look at the newspaper articles and the public's perception at the time was that we were running out of food. We were never running out of food. No. It's just we had it in the wrong pack sizes, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Also, I think what people fail to understand is how much hospitality subsidises those supply chains, in the manufacturing bit, in the wholesale businesses. So hospitality wholesale food subsidises public sector catering. So if you want to continue to have good value meals going to school children, you need hospitality functioning at full strength, because that's where they make their profits. Ditto with the manufacturers. The manufacturers will often make bespoke for the hospitality sector, and that's where they make their money and their profits. So I sit in an office alongside the Food and Drink Federation, which represents manufacturers, and we've also got links with the wholesale trade. And both of them are telling me that their businesses are going to collapse for supplying the retail chain simply because they don't have the profit driver of hospitality. And I think it's something that will come to the fore at Christmas in particular. If the government hadn't allowed retailers and supermarkets to open 24 hours in the run up to Christmas, they wouldn't have been able to fulfill the orders that they need to feed the country, because so many of us eat out in Christmas, in the run up to Christmas, not necessarily our Christmas dinner, but, it's not unusual to be out 3-4 times a night in the run up to Christmas with friends, with family, meeting with people from the office, and all of that food supply, you've got a challenge for the supermarkets. Plus the fact that you've got about 5 million of us who normally go away abroad for Christmas.
Yeah, wow. That's not happening this year, is it? My dad's in Cyprus at the moment, and he's coming back, I think, this weekend. And they've just had another lockdown, a full Cypriot lockdown. So now we're wondering, like, can he come? Can he not? You know, I think he'd love to stay anyway, to be honest. I don't think he wants to come back. So he's not overly bothered, whichever way the decision swings. So in the UK, well, actually, sorry, in England at the moment, we've got 3 lockdown tiers. We've got tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1, pubs and restaurants can operate table service only, stop taking orders at 10. Tier 2, alcohol may only be served with a substantial meal. No orders after 10. Food can finish at 11. And then tier 3, hospitality venues close. In your mind, if the tiers are going to stay for, let's say, another 6 months, or, you know, let the vaccine, we'll get onto that in a minute, but let the vaccine sort of kick in, where would you like that to be? How would you like those tiers to be shuffled in terms of hospitality? Is it just everything open and safely, or still some sort of tiers, but carefully done?
Well, I think what you have to remember is that when we reopened in July, and that period between July and September, we already had an awful lot of COVID secure protocols to make sure that we tackled the disease. And the social distancing restrictions that were in there dealt with all the risks that SAGE has identified. So you had to be seated. It was table service. You couldn't stand up. You couldn't walk around to go and order. You couldn't have noisy TVs and music going. You couldn't have entertainment. There was hygiene, sanitation protocols, and also you reduced the capacity as well as having ventilation. So you've already got really strict protocols to keep people safe just from going back to July. So you need those tiers reshaped in January, and we need a commitment by Easter that we'll be through this and we won't have tiers in place, and that we'll be looking at those residual concerns. So what I'd like to see in January, when they review the tiers to come into effect from February, is that we adjust some of those tougher tiers. So, you know, if you still need to have a top tier where people are closed, you need to be closing more than just hospitality. You can't ask hospitality to bear the brunt of it. But I'd like to see the restrictions eased further down the tiers. So tier 1 should be going back to July's operating protocols with the safety. The scientists this week said that the curfew has no basis in science, so take it off. If it's got no basis, take it off. You'd still have the rule of 6, table service, and all the other protocols. Tier 2, you need to allow mixed household socialising in tier 2. Go back to what we had in July, 2 households indoors, 6 outdoors, and get rid of the idea of a table meal. There is no difference at all between sitting in a COVID-secure, well-ventilated space, having a drink with a friend, than there is having a meal or a Scotch egg. And then tier 3, by all means, leave some of those tougher tier restrictions in place if it's necessary in tier 3. But I'd like to see a clear exit strategy in January about reducing those tier restrictions in February and eliminating them in March, so that in Easter we're operating with the minimal controls around social distancing and ventilation that are necessary. And then, you know, towards the summer, then we look at removing all the COVID restrictions altogether when the population is vaccinated.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me about one thing that I don't like, and me and my friend got into a really big argument about this, as we usually do, towards the end of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. It was right at the end. I can't remember the dates, and there was the curfew, the 10 o'clock curfew. 10 o'clock last orders in restaurants, that's it. And and he was like, Stell, it's useless, it's no good. He goes, you walk outside and you can't get yourself past people are just outside drinking beer or whatever. And I was trying to say that that's not the fault of the curfew, that's the fault of the people that won't go home.
Yeah.
And I think, and he was like, no, because I went to a restaurant and everyone was still hugging and kissing. I was like, well, again, like, that just shows that people aren't listening to the policy, and the waiters and so on don't want to go up to them and say, look, can you not do that? Because it's a bit draconian, isn't it? Like, whatever you say. Like, but for me, rather than a curfew, just say to people, don't loiter, don't stand outside for ages, because I think that's the problem. If you're taking your beer and you're standing outside till 12 at night and there's 50 of you, then that's the problem, and people can't get past. And I think rather than a curfew, it's just don't stand outside and loiter more than anything, in my view.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think, curfew is a classic example of where you've taken something that wasn't a problem and made it a problem. So our licensing laws provide for people to have staggered closing time. In the COVID secure protocols that were drawn up by the government, they required us to look at staggered closing times in high streets and town centres. So we didn't have loitering. They allowed off licenses to remain open. So most of those people weren't even taking the beer from the pub or the restaurant. They were going out of the pub and the restaurant, a COVID secure space, walking across the road to a supermarket or an off license, buying it and drinking it. So you've not got joined up thinking going on with government. And actually, you're right. They do need to focus much, much more on personal responsibility to make sure that people are doing what they need to do to keep themselves safe. Then we would be able to operate effectively in the way that we were in July through to September. And let's not forget, with those protocols in place, we were still operating below break even. With social distancing restrictions, we're still, 60, 70% of revenues at best. So it's not without a significant cost. But we did have 60 million customer visits a week during those weeks. And we had less than 1% of our workforce caught COVID and had a positive case. Very, very few instances of customers catching it. The highest it was at was that 5% of outbreaks, which is 2 or more people linked to a venue, were traced back to hospitality. But for the last 3 months, it's been less than 2%.
Yeah, but the data's coming out now, isn't it? And hopefully, if we're seeing this data, you'd hope that the government have more data, and because we're only going to see a portion of it. So let's hope they've got more, and they're really acting on it. And and I think they need to stop using hospitality as a scapegoat, or at least they just need to start working on the data they've got, and just, like you say, let people go out to eat, enjoy it, go home. And I don't know, I'm not a big fan of seeing people losing their jobs over this either. I know it's a bit of a jump there, but I don't know if you saw it in the news yesterday or today. I just think, stop shaming people, but also, I suppose it's a balance. So increasing personal responsibility, but then also don't shame people. Just suggest that people do something, and that's it.
Yes.
I'm sick of seeing people.
Well, we do need people who are in leadership positions to take a responsible approach to this and to show that they understand. I mean, part of the problem is you've got lots of people whose daily lives are not being directly affected by any of the restrictions they're placing on hospitality, because they are either not big users of hospitality or they're politicians and they have a different experience of hospitality on a day-to-day basis. And also, let's not forget that the people who are driving the health policy are public health experts who have a great concern about alcohol. So their perception, they're seeing the issue through a prism of fast food, alcohol being negative and causing a lot of harms. We need people to take responsibility for their own actions. And I think what we do desperately need to see is a sort of joined up approach from government that understands and demonstrates a clear understanding of the link between closing well-regulated, safe social spaces and cases spiking in the community and in areas that are not well regulated. This idea that if you close hospitality at 10 o'clock, people are just going to go home to their beds is naive and misunderstands the fact that people are inherently social animals. If you close hospitality, they're not just going to sit at home. They're going to go somewhere else, by and large, particularly younger people. And then they're going to look at house parties, unregulated raves, illegal raves. You can see that happening, and you could see it happening in the summer. So we need a government policy that looks at what people are doing in their daily lives. And if you're going to be so intrusive on the economy, you need to be equally intrusive or willing to be intrusive on people's personal lives too.
It's fair to say that, we probably think from being in England that England's took quite a hard stance on it. But looking at Twitter and so on, I think it's more obvious to me that the devolved nations like Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have actually been harder on hospitality in some ways, haven't they? And I think I can see how everyone says, oh, England's got it wrong. But then the devolved nations have doubled down and been firmer. And how drastic's that been on your members in those areas?
It's been absolutely horrific. The level of closure and the level of trade that is lost by repeated yo-yoing of restrictions. The one thing I would say, however, is that all of those devolved administrations have stepped up and are providing a greater amount of support to those businesses to allow them to be closed. So in England, you've got this tension between public health and business, because you don't have enough support for these businesses. So, the government is not saying close, because if it forced people to close, it would have to compensate them. It's not providing a big enough level of support. So people are caught in the middle of staying open and trying to eke out a living in order to support their teams. In Wales, for example, the grants are higher, and they've given people an amount per employee, so that you can get up to £150,000 in Wales for the same period of closure, where you're getting a maximum 3K from the UK government in England. In Scotland, there's a dedicated grant for nightclubs, for hotels, for tourist accommodation, for the tourist economy. So there's more cash available, and there's more cash available in Northern Ireland too. So it's the fact that our businesses are not being supported that is causing the problem in England, not necessarily the restrictions themselves.
I see. See, one as you're saying that, one thought that comes to my head is that England might as well do it, because we're still paying for the devolved nations to get it done anyway. Like, without getting political, it's like we are going to have to sort of plug that gap, whatever you say. Like, when Wales say next year, or, we had to pay extra, we're going to, the UK government is going to have to step up. So they might as well, like you say, just, we've got this far, give a little bit extra to these businesses that are really struggling, and help them through. And I just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the position we're at. There's a nursery rhyme that sort of goes, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost, and then the battle, and all those kind of things. I feel as though we're in that situation. We've gone through 9 months. The government has supported these businesses in England with grants, with business rates holidays, with furlough. They've supported these jobs. And now, for the want of additional support, emergency grant support to get through the next 2 months, they're going to, sort of lose all of those jobs that they've so carefully protected. And I get the fact that, the government hasn't got a bottomless pit of money, and it has to come to an end soon. But if you're asking hospitality to bear a disproportionate burden to let everybody else have a Christmas and enjoy themselves, you do need that support. If we had support through the next 2 months, December and January, when we're going to see the likelihood of biggest closures, then these businesses would return to growth very quickly when we reopen and restrictions are lifted, hopefully March, when the vaccine kicks in. Hospitality will generate the jobs the most quickly of any economic industry. If you lift the restrictions one day, a customer will come out the next. You create a job on the third. So if the government wants the rapid return to recovery, it needs to make sure that hospitality is in a good enough state to be able to deliver that. And then we'll go back to doing what we did post 2008, which was generating 1 in 6 of net new jobs. And you could see what happened when restrictions were lifted in July. The economy returned to growth pretty rapidly. In August, all of the economy growth in GDP, 2% growth in GDP in August, came from eating and drinking out. Now, you look at the figures that were released earlier this week, October's GDP figures, every sector of the economy was in growth apart from hospitality, and the economy stagnated. So, the government has a very stark choice. You either keep hospitality under restrictions and operating sub-economically, in which case we will be an anchor on growth and recovery, or you support us, and then we can be a generator of jobs growth and investment in our high streets and communities, and in many communities that would not have big alternative investment coming in and alternative employers coming in.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, and I think, again, I hope the government have looked at hospitality and realised what a contributor is. And I know they know from data, but actually when the money dries up a little bit, I wonder if then they look at it and say, whoa, we missed that. And I think, and I think because it left a huge gap in terms of, the income revenues. But one thing I was thinking, and it's a bit of a theory at the moment, but I think that I don't think we've even seen what hospitality can do yet. And I think because once you sort of open restrictions a little bit, we've got the vaccine pumping through. There's one factor we've all forgotten about. I think the demographic that enjoyed restaurants being open again was the younger generation. The grey pound has been locked up for ages. They've not even got out yet spending because they're afraid, and I get it too. So I think once they start getting the vaccines, I think people in our industry especially, I don't think they realise how important the grey pound is sometimes, because we think, the spend per head is low, they come when off peak and everything, but actually it's all those gaps that they fill. And if they feel the confidence to get out there and spend money again, alongside with everyone else who's okay, I actually think the bounce back could be even better as well.
I think you're right there. And, if you go back to sort of the heady days of Eat Out to Help Out, you still had about 35% of the adult population that hadn't come back to eat or drink out, so maybe 40%. Now, there's going to be a proportion of those who wouldn't eat out or drink out very frequently at all. But I think you're right. There's a large proportion, 60, 70, even 80-year-olds who would go out. And equally, the other factor is that they haven't travelled this year either. They've stayed in their homes. Now, they are more likely to do staycations. They're more likely to do day trips, weekend trips, and try and get back out and about. So I think you're right that we will see a resurgence and a coming back from those people. And equally, those people sort of, 40, 50 plus, a lot of those people will have worked from home and they will have high disposable incomes because they haven't spent money on train travel, on traveling to work, their cars, etc. So they've actually saved money during the pandemic by working from home. And then when they come back, they're going to be willing to spend that little bit extra, and people are going to want to pay for experiences.
Yeah. And I can see, a friend of mine's gone to Cornwall for a few days, and he stayed in a lovely B&B, and it's really nice. And I wonder if a lot of people are going to think like that rather than going abroad. Let's still keep it a bit more British staycation, and upgrade the hotel offering. And
absolutely. Or, book yourself catering cottage, but then go and eat out every night in the local community. And I think that the people will do that, because even if you look at sort of confidence returning, it's not going to return as quickly for the big ticket items. And I think, it's still a bit of a risk. It's still a bit of a gamble going abroad. And the quarantine arrangements are still so tight that, I don't think many people, I think an awful lot of foreign holidays for summer are booked in the first week after Christmas. Maybe that says something about what we've done at Christmas. But I can't see that happening this year. I don't think people will be confident. And people have had so many times in 2020 where their plans were cancelled, their holidays were cancelled, rescheduled, cancelled, weddings, events. I think you've got a lot of pent-up demand there.
Yeah, I think if anything, everything's going to demand a higher price, especially in the wedding industry, because if you've got a year's worth of weddings and then the other year's worth of weddings all in 1 year, I can see it all sort of like being a bit of a bottleneck somewhere as well, to be honest. I'd hate to be planning a wedding this year and next year, to be honest, because I feel sorry for those people, to be honest. Like, they're stressful as it is at the best of the times, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And people have had their plans disrupted. And event organisers, business conferences, business dinners. We would normally have a huge Christmas lunch for 1,400 people at UK Hospitality next week. We're not having that. Nobody's come together as a conference, come together as an industry in the events that we would normally have since February. So I think, again, you've got that side of the industry that will restart, and people will want to come back to meeting face to face.
Yeah. Well, one customer, I chatted to 2 customers this morning and friends, and actually about this specific topic, and they were both diametrically opposed, essentially. So I've got 2 cases for you. Overall, is how do you win? Because Hospitality UK covers a broad sort of, section of hospitality, hotels, restaurants, takeaways, and so on. So one chap's got a mixed group. He's got big restaurants and a couple of takeaways. And he said, why do you think business interruption insurance was not used as a mechanism to pay insurance instead of all these schemes? And the government paid insurers back instead of expensive schemes where fraud and money money and fraud has been disproportionate for the size of businesses that need it. And he says, for example, he's got one fish and chip restaurant. So he says, for example, fish and chip shops get grants, loans, VAT reduction. Some of them never closed. He made that a bit vague, but I've added a bit of detail. And some are busier, but larger restaurants, like some of his 200-seaters, have closed for 6 months, got no grants apart from sweet shop money, as he says, recently. So that's one example. So how would you, what do you sort of think about something like that? Like,
I think, this goes back to what we were talking about at the start of the conversation. Government going into this in a panic mode and not knowing what to do and reaching for the quick levers. I think that's why, if they were doing this again, I don't think there's any way they would have given money to the supermarkets. If they knew what they knew now, I don't think they would have reached for business rates relief in the way that they did. But they did it because they were looking rapidly around. And I think if we were going into a pandemic again. And I do think this is one of the things that the government is looking at. How do you ensure businesses going forward? Now we know that the black swans happened. It stops being a black swan. It's now a grey elephant. So it's going to be very difficult for any of our businesses to get business interruption insurance that would cover them for pandemic, for notifiable disease, for this type of thing in the future. So I think government needs to look for the future at how you can do that and how you can use an insurance-based scheme to pay out to avoid having to do this. I just think the answer to why they didn't do that in March is simply that it unraveled so quickly before them, and that they just didn't know how long it was going to take and how significant the impact was going to be. So that's why they developed the schemes that they did. You're absolutely right that you've got winners and losers in all of the compensation schemes. The biggest losers are the larger restaurants, the larger bars that have got a rateable value above £51,000. And I still don't know why the government didn't change that as we went further down into the pandemic, and you could see the impact that was having. Looking at it for smaller businesses and for small premises, it seemed to work very well when it was just going to be 3 or 4 months, but it doesn't get us anywhere near there now. And I think one of the issues that the Treasury has always struggled with is, how do you identify small businesses within our sector? And they used rateable value as a proxy for that. And it's just not the case, particularly in our towns and city centres. So I'm sure if they were saying, what would they do differently next time? Lots of other things that they would do differently. And they would be holding their hands up to say that the blunt instruments didn't work.
Well, I think it's also worth noting that they went with broad strokes, so people didn't get missed out. And some people did get missed out. There was a small proportion of people and companies that did fall through the gap. And I think if they didn't go with broad strokes and I think if you do a very fine, sort of very targeted approach early on, well, that takes time. And I think, so I understand why they didn't go with that. And let's just say gave everyone X amount for this and 25,000 for that, and really just pound it out fast. And then it gave them time to just think about what could be done next. But you're right. I think they could have tweaked that moving forward. They've got 3-4 months down the line. They could have said, all right, now who's winning? All right, supermarkets are doing great. They need nothing. Okay, well, these guys are still struggling, and some people have fell through the net. But I think on the whole, I think the broad strokes sort of helped, especially just to get everyone sorted very quickly. And were there the odd fraudster? Was the odd scammer? I'm sure there was. And will they get found out at some point? Probably not. Who knows?
Yeah. I think they're doing that now. HMRC is doing a lot of inspections now about furlough, about eat out to help out, about making sure that people aren't overclaiming and that we haven't made mistakes. So, I think hats off to the Treasury. In an unprecedented situation, they moved really rapidly. Normally rapidly for the Treasury is 6 months to a year. Within a matter of, I know it felt terrible when we were all living through the middle of it, but they had a solution for employees within 2 weeks of that announcement of don't go to pubs and restaurants. I think my only sort of slight criticism is that, they kept the whole economy solutions going for too long. And then they've run out of money for those that have either been left behind or for the second wave where you need more support.
I did see that the supermarkets are starting to pay back some of that money now, and I think maybe you'd like to say it's from the good nature of their hearts, but it's not. They know that it's against public opinion, and they have had a bumper year. So it just wouldn't make sense for them to keep it, would it?
No, it wouldn't. And particularly when they were given the sort of blessing to have as big a Christmas as they wanted to have. And you could see the damage that was doing to other parts of the economy and also potentially the damage to public health. I think there were two options that they could have done. They didn't need to give that money back to government. They could have decided to pool that money themselves and provide a high street support and recovery fund where they could have rapidly set up a system for distributing grants to businesses that were in distress, helping out smaller players, helping out those people in the sector that had got left behind. They've handed it back to Treasury. It's always very difficult to get money back out of Treasury again. But we have asked Treasury to look at that, ring fence it. You've got issues to do with high street hospitality, tourism resilience. You've got lots of people in our sector that did fall through the gaps. Nightclubs were closed, events venues were closed, wedding venues closed, and none of them got support. and the caterers that go behind that, none of them got support. You've got the freelancers. They could set that up. And in the same way, they've got a cultural recovery fund for music venues, entertainment, theatre. If they ring fence that and allowed us to bid in, that would help to provide that safety net for those people you're identifying who fell through the gaps and are really struggling otherwise, as well as those businesses that did get some help but haven't got enough to get them through to the other side.
Another friend of mine who's got quite a few fish and chip businesses, quite a lot, I'd say. Pre-COVID, deliveries were 12% of his business. Now they're 25%. Most people would look at that and say, oh, he's doing all right. But actually, he's not, because walk-ins have dramatically dropped. I think he said walk-ins have dropped by approximately 8,000 people a week, so about £80,000 a week for him in walk-ins, and then 25% on deliveries. And now it costs him more to deliver that product. And so what he's worried about is the opposite to what the other person's worried about. He's worried that now when the government starts targeting help and support, that they don't look at takeaways and think, well, they've had it well easy, they're doing all right. And then the next round of support, the sort of takeaway industry ends up getting left behind. And, say, for example, they say, oh, we're going to, and this is just a hypothetical example, VAT for restaurants is going to stay at 5%. But if you're getting a takeaway, it's 20%. Well, that's not going to help takeaways either, is it? And he's not saying it from a whinger point of view. He makes a valid case that it costs more to deliver food. It's a fact,
It does. And I mean, you've got exactly the same with the restaurants as well, where, those venues that were able to stay open and do delivery, yes, their delivery might have gone up from being 5% to 20% of sales, but it doesn't compensate for the loss of your core business. It's additional. It's nice to have, but it costs a lot to do it. So I think the interesting thing is that the government now, in the grants that it's been giving out, and I take on board entirely the other commentator's point that it's sweet shop money, but they have been able to differentiate in those grants, for the discretionary grants, how much money have you lost as a result of this crisis? And can you demonstrate your drop in revenue? And then you can get some additional support. Now, that's done at a local authority level. That's done for businesses that are open but trading with severe restrictions like takeaways. But that does at least enable local authorities to prioritise and be a bit more laser-like. So again, in the pub sector, you might have one pub in tier 2 that has to do a substantial meal, just absolutely cannot do it. You can't treat them the same as a pub that could do quite a lot of food and is just trading below because of social distancing. See, they're starting to differentiate it. I fear that it's too little too late. And ultimately, it's not going to be enough, because what we need now is compensation for the revenue lost.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think something's got to give there. So regarding VAT, I take it you are lobbying government to sort of keep this 5% VAT for, is it a little bit longer or the foreseeable future? Which one are you sort of aiming for?
Well, if I was really going to go for it, I mean, in my view, we keep it in perpetuity, but certainly you need to have it throughout 2021. It's quite clear that the recovery is going to not even start until April. The worst thing you could possibly do on the 1st of April is to require all of our businesses to put their prices up by 15 percentage points. You've got a consumer who's coming back out, whose confidence has taken a knock. You don't want to deter them. So in order to be competitive, both internationally for our hotels, but also competitive for consumers coming back out and weaning them back off supermarket food and sitting at home and getting them back into our venues as part of their work environment, but also as part of their home life, we need to be price competitive. And we don't want to put those prices up more. We're inevitably going to see price inflation coming through as a result of Brexit, deal or no deal. We're inevitably going to see food price inflation from fluctuations in the currency. Don't make it worse by on the very time that we look as though we're coming out of restrictions, 1st of April, Easter weekend. I mean, the worst possible time to put prices up. So we've started talking to government. It's not about a VAT cut. It's about stopping prices going up. It's about retaining the ability to keep prices as low as possible.
So I have a theory, and me and my theories, unfortunately, is what I do. So I have a theory that this government wants another term in office. Let's be honest, what government doesn't? And they're populists. People might think that Boris Johnson is a right wing, whatever, but he's not. He's a populist. We can see that from his time in as a mayor of London. Do you think, realistically, and I know you're lobbying anyway, but realistically, just see them putting it up before the next election? We can't wait and take the gamble. Obviously, you're going to lobby regardless, but it'd be pretty foolish if they do put it up before that.
I think it'd be pretty foolish to put it up in April when we've got local elections and mayoral elections. Next year is a big election year. It would be a pretty bad move, having decimated many of these metropolitan city centres. Think about the impact on Birmingham, on Manchester, and Newcastle and London, of what they've done with the tiers, and then say, and just as you're about to go to the polls, we're going to put the VAT back up.
It's not going to work, is it? No.
I just don't think it's politically tenable. Whether you can do it for the next 4 years, don't know, because crucially, when it comes to 4 years' time, their issue will be about repairing the public finances and have we got the economy back on track. Now, I would argue that the best way to get the economy back on track, to rebuild the resilience in our balance sheets, to get these businesses back up and functioning, because we're all going to come out of this heavily indebted, is to give them a VAT cut. It's the best way of repairing the businesses, it's the best way of sustaining jobs, and it's the best way of incentivizing growth.
So I have a second theory that's not the same as that one, but I think I might have mentioned it when we spoke last time. And I do think that this sort of, it molds into the fact that they now hopefully realize that people don't use hospitality as a treat anymore. It's actually a lifeline for people. Not everyone knows how to cook. Greg's is hospitality. So hospitality starts anywhere from £2 a head all the way to hundreds a head. So for me, I'm utterly convinced that the way, and again, this is your job, but I'm utterly convinced that the government should be looking at bringing VAT down to, or leaving it down at 5%, but widening the pool. I'm not being funny, but out of home food, it's still, if you're classing eating out as a luxury, then out of home food, there's no different to buying a hot sandwich or a cold sandwich from a supermarket. Because if it's the luxury that's value added, then in my view, buying a sandwich from Tesco is a luxury because I could have made it myself for a lot cheaper. And so in my view, if you made all hot food, get rid of that whole pasty-gate, sausage roll-gate, whatever it was, a few years ago with Greg's, get rid of that. Are you buying something that you could conceivably make yourself at home? Yes. Okay, there's VAT on that, and it's 5%. And that way, everyone's in the VAT pool, fish and chip shops, Indian restaurants, pizza, cold food, you name it. And I don't know what you feel about that. Someone who understands all these different models, do you see that as a conceivable model?
I don't think it fits within the existing VAT law. And so you need a fundamental change in the tax regime as to what is it that makes it value added, because it's not just about luxury, it's about what you've done to that product to make it value added, which is why you get into Pastygate. But certainly it's an approach that could be taken. The UK's fiercely defended zero VAT on supermarket food. But there is a point about, food as fuel versus food as an experience. And should you really be differentiating between the two? Post-Brexit, we have the opportunity to do what we like and construct our VAT regime as we like. So I think we would be encouraging the government to make the most of that opportunity in the same way that they can use the duty regime for out-of-home alcohol versus at-home alcohol if they wanted to. But I think the fundamental premise is right. They've recognised that this is now a large part of what we do on a daily basis, and the economy is so hospitality is so embedded in the economic fabric and the community fabric of our high streets. So that's why they need to support it.
I just think, imagine how many people would eat out more comfortably, regardless of what food it was, if it was 5%. We'll see that very soon. How many people would go to a nice restaurant or a nice B&B or whatever it is. But for me, the way I see it is in a very basic form. I can make a salad at home for £1, or I can buy one from Tesco or Sainsbury's or whoever for £4. And yet all they're making, and that's allowed because they're allowed to do this, it's free market, they're making a lot more margin and no VAT, and yet if I want to buy that salad from, let's say, a Wetherspoons or any restaurant, it's going to cost me £8 because they've now got to consider staff and VAT at 20% and so on. So I think this government needs to look at levelling up rather than penalising. And I think,
yeah, and I think it's a very important point about levelling up. And I think also that the government needs to look at the tax base more creatively, you know, rather than just sort of tweaking with the business rates or looking at other things. You know, it's really good that they've launched a call for evidence about the tax treatment of the sharing economy, and making sure that we're all paying our fair share. We've got a tax regime, whether it's VAT or business rates or corporation tax, which is based on a 20th century, sometimes a 19th century interpretation of the economy and economic activity. And we need the government to look at that in the round and afresh.
Yeah. So one topic that came up today was aggregators. And one person said, do you think it's within the power of UK hospitality or remit to regulate the aggregators? There are many issues aside from the fact that 12 to 37% goes in commissions on top of the VAT that we usually have to collect. To many, they have become a business partner metaphorically and almost literally. That, you know, there are serious issues around insurance, hire and reward, and gig economy workers. And at some point, whose problem is that going to be? And and just to bolster that, I saw an article today, and it was saying how Just Eat are now starting to look at employing their own staff, to do the deliveries rather than gig economy workers. So, have they started to figure out that this ain't going to carry on working the way it is with gig economy?
I think they have, and I think gig economy worked when you were in a full labour market. You know, if people could pick and choose how many hours they worked, it fit in with them to be able to do some gig economy work because they could, you know, do part-time at the real creative job they wanted to do. They could then earn some money somewhere else. I think that in the new world of work, as we come out of COVID and with 2.5 million people unemployed, gig economy is not going to be such an attractive area to be working in. And equally, what we found in COVID, the people that we were talking about who fell through the gaps were those that weren't in a normal employment contract. So you had lots of people who were self-employed, lots of people who were working on a different basis or had their own company and were paying themselves a dividend and not paying a salary, suddenly found that the way that they had chosen to be employed meant they didn't qualify for a lot of the support that the government was able to give. And that's sort of, I think, is causing a rethink and a wave through. And I think it's also part and parcel of the Tesco's handing back the business rates. These big companies have been reminded of their need to show some corporate social responsibility. So I think you will see a reconfiguring. I'm not sure it's our role as a trade body to regulate. We're not a regulator. So in terms of regulating the gig economy, that would continue to rest with the government. But we can, as the voice of the businesses and the operators, engage in a productive two-way dialogue with those aggregators, whether it's Just Eat and Deliveroo, or whether it's online travel agencies and booking.com, or whether ultimately it's Google. You know, I mean, that the power of Google is the one that we're really all dealing with. I think that we can facilitate that relationship to have those productive discussions, but I'm not sure it's for us to regulate.
No. Yeah, I think regulate was probably the wrong word. I think it just stuck in my head after we discussed it. But I think he meant more so advise the government for them to regulate. But I'm always a bit cautious about regulation. When you regulate one thing, it doesn't sort of end there. It becomes part of a bigger package. And that's why regulations take ages to come through. And I always say to people, like, you know, in our industry, for example, a lot of fish and chip shops use hydrogenated oil. And for a long time, a chap that I know has been telling people, look, let's self-regulate and stop using this product. Instead, they waited, and the government have actually said, we're banning it. And he said, you don't want the government to ever tell you what to do. You want to almost get there before them. And I do wonder if this is what Just Eat's doing a little bit. It's like they're getting ahead of it so they can look like, you know, we're good supporters here. We're good workers. We're working with everyone. And I'm sure they are too, you know, and I'm sure they are.
I think you're probably right. You know, they're seeing the way the wind is blowing. They're seeing what's happened as a result of COVID, and they're looking at making changes. And obviously they're adapting from being a small startup to being a really big international business. You see the same with the Airbnbs and people like that. They suddenly can't stay with the same ethos that they had when they were starting out. And that whole gig economy ethos of, everybody pitching in a community works when you're small businesses, doesn't necessarily work when you're large players. So I think that they are probably at about the right time moving into that area.
Yeah. One thing that I saw that you've been sort of discussing recently as well is rent moratoriums. So rent stacking up, whatever you say, it's all getting put on the account. Landlords are saying, look, you don't have to pay it now, but you will. You're saying there needs to be someone needs to sort of cover this. And I take it, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are we assuming that you want the government to step in and say, look, we'll cover this just to get everyone back on their feet? Because landlords can't take the hit either, can they?
No, and I think what we're really saying is it's gone on so long and it is now so big that it will cripple the economy if you just make one person deal with it. It's quite clear, however, that the market alone won't deliver a solution because, we've had that for 6 months. Both sides are still starkly there. We've got about 40% of landlords for our member companies still saying pay in full and then we'll discuss anything going forward, or refusing to negotiate. So that's not going to change overnight. So I think, you do need the government to step in to bring people together. We've put forward 2 different proposals to government over the course of the last 3-4 months. One is for the government to do what other European countries have done and incentivize landlords offering rent reductions. So in other parts of the world, they've given a tax incentive if a landlord has reduced the rent or waived a proportion of the rent debt. In Australia, they required the landlords to waive 50% of the rent debt. And the other thing that we've suggested to government is, okay, let's get all 3 parties, or 4 parties, if you like, the landlord, the lessee, the banks, and the government, to cover the cost of the rent debt. So the lessee is only bearing a quarter, but it has to be a principle of shared pain. The other alternative we put to government was if they didn't want to give a grant and cover a quarter of the rent, which for hospitality would be about 700 million. If you got the other parties to agree to waive a proportion or to pay a proportion, that would be manageable. The other alternative we said was, okay, if you can't do that, then can you set up a new loan scheme so that we could swap commercial rent debt for a very long-term, very low interest government debt? Nobody wants more debt, and it's not the ideal scenario, but at least that takes the pressure off and you're not having to pay rent in one go. Otherwise, I just foresee lots of businesses falling over.
I like the idea of the quarter one, where it's a shared burden between 4 parties. I just don't see anyone having an issue with that, I think, in my view. Well,
they shouldn't, but lots of people have.
Yeah, of course.
Still got people holding out for getting their payment in full.
I suppose another option would, I suppose, the government probably could just deal with the banks, and that way the landlord doesn't make profit on it and they'll just pay it off there, maybe, or but again, what if there's you could do it that you could look at how much trade have you lost, what's your fall in revenue, we'll reduce the rent by an equivalent amount, and the government could give a tax incentive to the landlords, so the landlords get something out of it. They like a tax incentive, don't they? So we've got to talk about Brexit a little bit. Do you think with Brexit ending or beginning, whichever way you see it, deal or no deal, would it be nice to actually see some long-term planning, especially with business rates? It's not fair that the likes of Amazon pay less per square foot than many businesses struggling afloat in town centres. When I say, I'm not saying that we need Brexit to finish because we're not allowed to legally do it. I just mean that all the government attention is either on COVID or Brexit. So would it be nice to maybe see, something happening there?
It would, and I think it would be really good to see something from this government that is beyond 3 months planning. And that's not a criticism of them. It's just that if you're in an emergency situation, that's the most you can do. And I think you're right. Brexit currently is absorbing all the management bandwidth that's spare over and above COVID. And I think that's partly why government has gone, December, you're in these tiers, you're stuck, you're closed. Now let's just get some attention on Brexit so we can try and get it sorted out. It would be good to see some long-term planning, and it's really heartening to see the first signals of that from government. So they have issued a consultation on business rate reform. They've pushed the rates next review back in order to get root and branch reform through by 2023. So they've got a timeline for that. When they announced the rent moratoria, they also announced a review of Landlord and Tenant Act, so they can look at some of the issues to do with upward only rent review clauses, quarterly upfront payments, those kind of issues, delapse that sort of get in the way there. And then finally, that the call to evidence on things like taxation of the gig economy, taxation of the sharing economy, signs that they're starting to look more strategically about how we develop economic and industrial policy in a way which fits the modern environment. So, it'd be really good if we can get towards end of March and we've got Brexit dealt with, we've got COVID contained and a route map out with the vaccine, and we can start to look at what we actually need to do as a country for upskilling, levelling up, addressing all the investment issues, all of those structural issues that have bedeviled our sector for such a long time.
Definitely. And, talking about representation, there isn't a hospitality minister. We've written about it. We've supported, your calls for it. Lots of people trying to push, I think, 60,000 votes now? Or not, is it votes? It's not, it's signatures.
Petition, yes.
It feels a bit like X Factor. And, if we had a hospitality minister, well, two questions. Do you think we'll ever get one? And if there was a hospitality minister during COVID, what do you think would have been different?
I think COVID means that we will get one, because COVID has meant we've got one by default. Now, whether it's the right solution or it's the right level or it's somebody who's got multiple responsibilities, but what has hindered us before, we've got two brilliant ministers that we've worked with. One is Nigel Huddleston in tourism. And tourism is sort of that was dealing with all of it, domestic tourism, international tourism. That was the only point in government that you could go to talk about hospitality. And as a result of COVID, they've set up a hospitality unit within Bays, and they've actually got a dedicated team of civil servants working on it for the first time. And Minister Paul Scully, who's also small business minister, retail minister, and high streets minister, is now chairing the hospitality task force. The problem with both of them, they've been brilliant. So I think COVID has shown the fact that you need a hospitality voice within government as well as the tourism voice. You can't have one or the other. The problem with both of them is they've got too many jobs. So you need to make sure that you've got a streamlined set of responsibilities and that they have got a real focus on those issues of concern. So I think it's more likely than ever that we will get a hospitality minister. What we need to make sure is that within the cabinet, you've got responsibility for tourism and hospitality reflected in the cabinet positions too.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty important. And if there was like someone who just did this all day long, nothing else, I suppose in some ways you would have a quicker line of conversation with these people, wouldn't it? It would be a lot quicker rather than having to, you need to talk to this one, you need to talk to that one. It'd just be, look, here's our concerns, and constantly pushing them at those concerns, wouldn't it, I suppose?
Absolutely. And they would have the laser-like focus on our sector. They'd understand the workings of our sector and know what needed to happen. And with all of these things, you've got a central point with the Treasury, Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. And it's about the weight of representation going into those bodies to get the policies we need. If you have got that dedicated voice as a minister working for you, it demonstrates that you're hugely important economically and you need to be listened to rather than being sort of one of a mass of people.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's fine for every other sector to almost have a minister, isn't it? And yet we don't. And you think it's just a bit, it's just that it doesn't make sense in this day and age. But like you say, post-COVID, post-Brexit, maybe this is the time. And I was thinking, and tell me if I'm wrong, this is now the time. Again, I know it touched on VAT again, but this is the time to sort of try and strike at the government. And I think because now that they're sort of in a weaker position, less time to think about things, now is a time to start demanding, isn't it, really, I think?
It is. And I think particularly at the moment, it's capitalising on that leverage we've got and the understanding we've got. And our leverage comes from the number of people we employ and the number of jobs that are dependent upon our sector. So at the present moment in time, they've got a very real easy way of identifying how important we are economically to them and having the reason to focus. Once we get into the good times, they forget and they take us for granted. So now's the time to be able to capitalise on their awareness ahead of further on.
What we've been trying to do at Sarah's lately is trying to sort of get restaurant owners, takeaway owners to understand, what VAT is and why it is. We've written articles about it so people really understand it. Because I think that I really think they need to start liaising with their MP on a local level. And that way you guys can work on the top, really like lobby government centrally. And then everyone else can work from the bottom and talk to their local MP. Because if there is a vote on this one day, well, if those local MPs have no idea how it's impacting their constituents, then I think you're sort of going in a bit broken. Whereas if you can hit it from top and bottom, I think that's quite important.
I think that's absolutely key. And that's what we've seen all the way along this, where we've had the breakthrough moments where support is given, hospitality is recognised. It comes from having that grassroots explanation of what it means in practice on the ground, and lots of local MPs lobbying and reinforcing our asks, because a lot of lobbying comes from MPs walking in the House of Commons with each other and sort of catching a minister and saying, I've had 50 letters from restaurants in my constituency, you've got to do something. That's where the power of hospitality comes from, because you've got that such wide reach. So we need to make the most of that and use all of our thousands of premises and millions of employees.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you go shortly. I've just got a couple of little points. It's probably a bit premature, but what would you say your 2 to 5 year plans are, or, in bullet points? What would you say the biggest focuses are, even if it's just a recap of what we've discussed?
Yeah, I mean, our big focus at the moment is around VAT and business rates, getting both of those extended for at least a year and then reformed and reforming the tax base. And then it's about support for employment and upskilling and reskilling people. So making sure that we've got the access to the labour we need, we've got the access to the skilled workers, that we've got the T levels, the A levels, the vocational qualifications and the apprenticeship structure right to allow hospitality to grow. And then it's about incentives for investment.
Yeah, wow. And then is there anything I should have asked you and didn't that really needs bringing up?
No, I think that's it. We've covered everything.
I think we have. And I think I've kept up with you better this time. Last time, I just felt like I was scrabbling through my notes and it was just like, boom, 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 boom. And I said to a friend of mine after, wow, she's pretty amazing. And he goes, why? I said, because I felt like I went into it prepared. And I said, but literally, I was just sitting there scribbling off notes and you were talking. I was like, I literally did not have the time. And I think you really impressed me, the amount of detail that you were holding, But I suppose that is what you do every day.
That's my job. I think that's possibly why we've been able to keep on top of this and keep progressing. And that's my short, medium, long term, and my immediate objective is I've worked in the industry for nearly 30 years. It's an industry I love and people that I love, and I just want to make sure that I'm best equipped to be their champion when I go out and meet up with the ministers and sort of oppose their policies or promote their policies. I just want to do the best I can to make sure the industry is in as good a shape as possible.
Oh, you know what? Well, Christmas is around the corner and I think you really deserve a nice break.
Thank you. Just a break would be nice.
Well, we might as well have the added bonus of nice, But, yeah, just a few days of just some sleep, yeah. But no doubt you are going to be working over that break, I guess, because there is going to be news coming from the government, no doubt. So yeah.
There is, and equally, we've got tier reviews, we've got prep to do for next year. There's the time to catch breath and think about strategy and try and think about getting ahead in the game for where we need to be next year. So, I hope everybody manages in hospitality to get a break. And I suppose in this year, we'll all have a forced break. Normally, most people in hospitality will be working flat out over Christmas and New Year. So I hope everybody gets a chance to recharge their batteries.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I just want to say thank you for your time today. And I can't wait to see you again in person, in real life.
Yeah, it'd be good to make sure that we do that in 2021. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.